I decided to be a carpenter, I joined a 4-year apprenticeship where you worked in the day alongside of a journeyman, and then you had to go to school at night. There were an awful lot of trade secrets because those guys had come up in the old days and come up in the hard way. But a lot of them were close to retirement, and they were glad to pass it on to somebody who was willing to learn. When I started as an apprentice, I did all kinds of work. In later years, I began to concentrate on interior finish, and that's where I got a lot of practice hanging doors and windows. I think I'm lucky to have had the experience that I did, to be trained by the old-timers. And now video is just about as close as you can come to a real apprenticeship, and I'm happy to have made this tape to show some of the things I've learned. Hello, I'm Tom Law, and as you can see, I've framed up some walls here in this old gymnasium so that I can show you how to install exterior doors, windows, and some interior doors. First, I'll tell you some things about the framing. This is a normal 2x4 wall with 1/2-inch plywood sheathing on the outside. We plan to put 1/2-inch drywall on the inside, but normally exterior doors and windows are set before the inside is finished. This is a king stud, and next to it is the jack stud. At the top, this is a header. This is a 2x4 doubled and turned edgeways, and across the top, these are the cripple studs. Now this rough opening has been prepared for this exterior door, and the rough opening is always wider than the frame. This opening over here is prepared for this window. As you see, the framing is pretty much like the door with studs, jacks, headers, and cripples, but the rough opening always has to be wider and higher than the window frame itself. Now this window is a double hung window, which means that both the top and bottom sash operate. Windows like this can be a single hung, double hung, or triple hung. The hanging means to make them operate. Now this window next to it is a casement window. I'm not actually going to install this one, but I wanted to show you the difference. These are the most common types of windows used around here. And unlike the double hung window, it operates like a door, and it has a hinge on the bottom, another hinge on the top, and a crank operator here. It also has a lock on this side which will hold it in place when it's closed. The second thing I'm going to do in this tape is to install a fixed glass unit in this opening. This is a thermal unit, and that means that it has glass on both sides, separated by an aluminum frame, entrapped air, and then sealed on the outer edges. You can get these in any size. A lot of people use them for big picture windows. This one I'm just going to install in this opening, and then I'm going to frame it using this clear white pine 1x6. And after these two windows are set, I'm going to move over to this door. Now this is a pre-hung exterior door. It's all set up and ready to go. This frame has been assembled. It has a brick molding already in place. This is a combination of aluminum and wooden adjustable threshold. This has weather stripping across the bottom, along the sides. The hinges are installed. It's been bored for its lock set, both on the door and the jamb. This is a raised panel design, which makes it look like an old wood door. Wood doors are traditional, but metal doors are becoming more popular because they're better for weather resistance and insulating value. This has a foam core. This is an insulating glass unit, and this is a removable wood mullion unit, sometimes called a grill. As I said earlier, doors have different fillings. This door is foam filled. This is a sample from a fire door, and this is an incombustible mineral material, which gives it its fire rating. After this exterior door has been set, I'm going to move to the inside of the house and work on this inside door. And this is a 2x4 wall with 1/2-inch drywall on both sides. In this opening, I'm going to install this door with this jamb. Unlike the pre-hung door that I set, I'm going to hang this one in place. And that means I'm going to set the jamb, fit the door, install the hinges, and install the lock set. Now this is a flush hollow core door, and this is a cutaway of the same kind of door. Here you can see the interior with this cardboard honeycomb that separates the front and the back face. This is a wood stile, a stile on the other side, and this particle board is the lock plate. A lot of interior doors are pre-hung, but there are advantages to hanging them in place. One advantage would be to use a different kind of material that you can find in the lumber company for the jamb or for the door, or maybe you want to make the door yourself. The last thing I'm going to do in this tape is to create a nightmare. I'll take this frame and panel door and put it in a deliberately misaligned jamb. I'll make this head out of level, this jamb side will be out of straight, the bottom will be out of parallel, and this jamb side will be crooked also. Now these are conditions you run into in old work and sometimes even in new work. But I'll fit this in place and show you all the tricks I know about hanging doors. Well, most windows these days come all assembled from the factory. This is a vinyl clad window and has this vinyl nailing flange along the side to nail it against the sheathing. Vinyl and aluminum cladding are popular these days because of reduced maintenance, but of course we still use a lot of wooden windows. The first thing you need to consider about windows is the size. Windows are sized by the opening. This one is 2 feet 8 inches wide and 4 feet 6 inches high, and it's called a 2846. You also need to consider the outside of the frame dimension, and this one is 33 3/4. You need to know the frame size and add about 1/4 inch to each side for shimming space. I prepared this rope opening 34 1/4 inches, a ½ inch greater than the overall frame size. We also need to talk about the jamb thickness. This is a ½ inch plywood sheathing on the outside, a 2x4 wall, and we'll put ½ inch drywall on the inside. That'll give us a dimension of 4½ inches. When I measure the jamb thickness on the window, and that's 4½ inches also, which means that this jamb will fit just right. Your wall thickness might be greater, and in that case you'd have to add a jamb extension on the inside. So I'll just pick the window unit up, put it in its place, and adjust it until it's about in the middle of the opening. And then I'll check it for level. Take my 2-foot level and check the head. Well, it looks like the left side has to be raised a little bit, but to be sure, I'll check the sill. So I have an assistant on the inside who's going to slip a shim shingle under this leg when I raise it. Okay, let's try that. A little bit more. Okay, that's good. Now I'll check it for plumb. Well, that's plumb, and it's straight. That's good. Check this side. All right, that's plumb and straight. That's good. I've started with this window because this is an easy installation, but with a window or a door, it's very important that the head and the sill be level and the sides plumb and straight. I'm going to attach this to the wall by driving a nail at the top on both sides. And then one on the bottom on both sides. I'll check the jamb and I'll show you why. Even though it's attached top and bottom, I can still move the jamb in and out. And like this. I'll use my 4-foot level for a straight edge. It has a little bow in the middle, and I'll take that out with a shim shingle. Well, this is what a rough opening usually looks like. There's more space here at the bottom. I'm going to put my finger in here, but I can't put it in here at the top. I'll take this bow out with a shim shingle, and I'll use a taper of these shingles to fill up the space as neatly as possible. This is too wide for the butt of the shingle to go in, so I'll cut it off. I'll use a sharp utility knife. Score it on both sides and break it off. Okay, that goes in. Now I'll use this side to fill up that space. Now I'll check it for straight. Okay, that's got it. Now I'll put a nail in there. If this were a wood jamb, I'd put the nail right through here. But since this is finished vinyl, I'm going to put it right on the edge here where it'll be out of the way of the trim. Being careful not to smash the vinyl and set it with a nail set. All right, now if that's fixed, I'll move to the other side and check it. Now that the middle is held in place, I'll put 2 more shims on the top and the bottom. And after I've done that, I'll shear these off with my utility knife, like this. Now I'll check this with a piece of scrap sheetrock to make sure it's going to line up. That's good. Check the top and the bottom. All right, that's good. When the wall is insulated, this crack here between the window and the frame will be chinked with insulation. After the sheetrock goes in place, the trim will cover it like this. After I've finished the shims on this side, I'll move to the outside of the window and finish nailing up the flange. This window will be finished. This is the polyethylene vapor barrier, and I'm going to wrap it around the framing, staple it so it's good and tight. I'll be careful not to cut too close in the corner here, so that might avoid an air leak. Fold this up. And then trim off the excess. Now this is a frame made out of clear 1x6. It has rabbeted joints on the corners, and this is a stop bead that'll hold the fixed glass in place. I'll slide this in the opening and go about setting it pretty much the way I did the other window.
I'm going to make the sill just as level as it can be, because that'll also adjust the head at the same time, since the sides are parallel. Put some shingles in there to adjust it up. Then put a set of shingles at the top to snug it up. Now, since there's no nailing flange in the way, I can slide these shingles in from both sides. Fill up the space really neat. Check to make sure that it's going to be flush with the inside surface. Then nail right through the shingles with 8-penny finish nails. And set them about a 1/16 deep so that the holes can be filled. Check again and shim the bottom. Put a shim in the middle. On this side I've already got the shims at the top and bottom. When they're all nailed up, just cut them out of the way and get rid of them.
Well, this is a glazing tape. As you can see, it's very flexible. It's on a paper backing, and it'll expand and contract with temperature movements in the window. It'll be applied here on the inside of the stop, and the window will go against it. Now that the glazing tape is in place, I'll put the glass in. And I'll set them on these little setting blocks. I'll put these on the windowsill, one on each end and one in the middle. These are little cushions for the bottom of the glass. And the glass is ready to go in. Put them in first on the blocks. Slide it in, that's a good fit. It has a little room all the way around so that it can expand. Now these are the inside stops, and I've already put the tape on it. It's a little easier that way, and I'll carefully put it in place because it's very adhesive. Make sure that it's pressed up tight, and then I'll nail it down.
Come around to the outside window, the caulk to stop. I'm using this clear silicone caulk. The glazing tape didn't quite fill the whole space, and so I'll caulk right in this joint here. Moving back on the inside of the house, there's one more thing I have to do to finish this window. I'll seal this space with expanding foam. This will make your house much more comfortable and keep the drafts out. Don't try to put too much in because the foam expands over time. If you miss a place, you can always put some more in. And the bottom. Well, like the window, which had a nailing flange on it, this one has brick molding, and that'll stop it when it goes into place, right up tight against the sheathing. Also, like the window, the first thing I'll do is check it for level. Okay, this left side has to come up a little bit. Now I'll put my flat bar under there and raise it and hold it with a shim shingle. Just to back up a little bit, if this were a new house, this threshold would be sitting on the subfloor. When you raise it to level it, this creates an airspace. Normally, I would set this in a bed of caulk, and when it's finished, caulk around the edges. Well, I'll snug that up just a little bit. All right, that's good. Now I'll check the side for plumb. Plumb means perpendicular to level, or directly to the center of the earth. This could be a mistake using a 4-foot level on the brick molding like this because the molding might not be straight. The level reads plumb. I'll check it with this straight edge. And this one is straight. All right, it's ready to nail. Just like the window, I'm going to start at the top corner, put a long finish nail through here, and then one at the bottom. Check the other side. Better check it again for straight. No, this one isn't quite right. It's tight at the top and the bottom, but there's a crack here in the middle. But I can use my 4-foot level against the straight edge, and it reads top to bottom. And this side is plumb, so I'll just need to nail it. Again, I'll nail the top and bottom. I can use the door now because it's fixed in place. The threshold and the head are level, and the sides are plumb, but it's not finished. Well, the first thing I need to fix is this. The door is sagging. This jamb is not very tight because it's only being held by the molding on the outside. This rough opening is pretty bad. It's really wide here at the top and goes down to nothing at the bottom. I'll have to use a lot of shim shingles in different places to compensate for that. The first one I want to put in is up here by the top hinge, and I want that to be a little loose because I want to pull the jamb over. So to hold that, I'll put a little 4-penny toenail through here. And then I'm going to nail through the jamb into the framing. Now these are 10-penny finish nails. They're going to go right through that shim and into the framing. Two nails for each shim.
Drive it near the surface and then set them. That'll tighten it up. Well, that's better, but it looks like it still needs a little more. I'll take that out with the screws through the jamb. Now that's much better. Looks good on this side, but there's a little problem down here. This is too tight here, and that's because this door is sagging. It wants to pull on the top hinge and push on the bottom hinge, and this movement shouldn't be there. This jamb should be fixed to the frame. I'll take that out by putting a shim in here, and as I do that, you can see the door move over. That's about the right margin, so I'll nail it. Normally I'd use my straight edge against the jamb to check it for straight, but I can't now because these wedges are in the way. And so I'll use the margin on the door to check it. Then I'll need to put some shim shingles in here, just above this hinge. As you can see, I've had a little trouble keeping this door closed. One of the reasons for that is this weather stripping is new. It's putting a little pressure against the door. Another reason a door would want to swing open by itself would be that the wall is not plumb, and that could be a real problem. You could fix that on the outside by putting in a long shim, but the inside surface should be flush with the inside finish. Now the last thing I have to do is go back to the outside and nail up the trim. That looks good. Now the last thing I need to do is adjust this threshold. A little too tight. Well, if you decide to hang your door in place, instead of using a pre-hung unit like the one I just did, you might have to do something like this to your flooring. This is a model of a floor system, and this would be a rim joist, or sometimes called a joist band. This is the floor joist, and this is the subfloor. On the pre-hung unit that I just installed, the threshold set directly on the subfloor. But if you have one like this, you'll have to recess it so that the top of the sill matches up with the top of the finished flooring. This is an exterior jam set that you can buy from your lumber company, knocked down, and then you assemble it with the headpiece and the sill. Now the sill is sloping, and it's 1 3/4 inches thick. When I put it in its place, it's recessed onto the floor. It slopes here, and if I pick it up, you can see the rabbet that overlaps the subflooring. And then when I take the 3/4 piece for the finished floor, that'll make a nice smooth transition. Well, you saw the weather stripping that came with the pre-hung door, but if you'd want to choose your own, here are a couple of other kinds. This is a wood strip with a flexible gasket on the top. It goes here right at the stop, snugged up against the door, and then it's nailed through. Here's one that's been used for years and years, and it's a copper strip. You nail it inside the rabbet, and it expands, and when the door closes, it's pressed against this edge. And here's something else that'll help you keep the cold drafts out. This is a felt weather strip called a door sweep, and it's applied on the inside of the door, sweeps along when the door is opened, and when it's closed, it seals against the threshold. Well, that about takes care of the outside doors and windows, and now it's time to move into the inside. Well, this is a piece of poplar that I've turned into a model of an interior door. This is the interior jam set, and it's dadoed into the sides, a lot like the window frame that we did earlier. This piece on the bottom wouldn't be on a real door, but I've put it on here to hold this frame rigid. On the real door, I'll replace this with a spreader that'll hold the jam sides apart. This is the inside stop, and the distance from here to here is the same thickness as the thickness of the door. But on this side, this stop is set back an additional 1/16 of an inch, greater than the thickness of the door. And that's to prevent this edge from binding when the door is closed. But as you see, this door won't close, and it's for a different reason. This edge is square and it needs to be beveled. Doors swing on an arc, and the center of the arc is the center of the hinge pin. I'll use my divider to demonstrate. I'll put one leg of the divider right on the center of the hinge pin and the other leg on the edge of the door, and when I swing it, you can see that part of the arc. That's how you find the amount of bevel, but usually 3 to 5 degrees would be enough. Well, here's the required bevel, and I'll scribe a line all the way down the edge. I like to use old hand planes. This one's nice and sharp, and when I start, I'll only be making a narrow cut on the one side, and it'll get wider as I go along. I use my hand against the edge to guide it with, and you see I lift the plane on the return stroke, only putting pressure on the forward stroke. Otherwise, you'll dull the iron. Okay, that looks good. And the margins look good. The margins should be equal all the way around. In the old days, they used to call it nickel and dime. That means that they used a dime for a thickness gauge on the hinge side and a nickel on the latch side. And I use a nickel across the top. Now this door is a little bit greater than that, and that's because it's winter and the door is contracted. In the summertime, it'll be tight. So if you fit your doors in the winter, make this a loose nickel. In the summer, make it tight. Sometimes these margins can be closed by paint buildup. And if you have to reduce the size of the door, take it off of the hinge side and then reset the hinges. You can see that the mortise for this hinge leaves the surface flush with the edge of the door. And I've left about 3/16 of an inch here. And that lets the barrel of the hinge project out beyond the face of the jamb so that the trim will fit. Well, here's something else about hinges. Hinges are bent, and that's called swaging, so that when the leaves are closed, they'll be parallel. Here's the diamond here again, and that's a parallel joint. But they're not always like that. You need to check your hinges to check the swage, because you might have to make this mortise a little deep or a little shallow to control the margin on the side. Well, there's another way to change this margin, and that's called throwing the hinge. You can shim behind the hinge leaf, and that will move the door either this way or that way. But I'll tell you a lot more about throwing the hinge on the next doors that I'll hang. Whenever I can, I like to use my old hand tools that I was taught with. This is a joiner plane, my hand saws, which are sometimes faster than a skill saw, a jack plane, some specialty markers, and specialty planes. But the next door is going to be done in production basis, and so I use the electric ones. A router, electric plane, skill saw, and drill. And now I'll get right to it. Here we are back on the inside of the house. This is the 2x4 wall with the half-inch drywall on the sides. This is the jam set and the hollow core interior door. A lot of people use pre-hung doors, and so do I, but I'd rather hang them in place. When I do that, I have to keep the time up, and I have to use all the shortcuts I can. The first thing you need to do is measure the door, and this one is 30 inches. It's important to do that because a lot of them come downsized from the factory. Next is to cut the head, and I'll cut it 30 inches long, plus the depth of the two dados. Well, here's a handy way to make that measurement. Use your combination square as a depth gauge, and that's 3/8.
After the head is cut to length, just nail the sides together. 6 penny nails would be good enough. 3 on each side will hold it. While door hanging is usually a one-man job, when you work by yourself, you learn to do a lot of tricks and shortcuts. I'll just take a shim shingle and nail it on the surface of the wall here. When the door jamb goes in place, that'll be sure that it's flush with the surface of the wall. This way, I can concentrate on the bottom and the top will hold itself. This piece of wood is the spreader, and it holds the bottom of the jamb 30 inches apart, exactly the same as it is on the top. Put some shim shingles in there to snug it up. It doesn't have to be perfect right now, because it's going to have to be adjusted when you plumb the sides. Put the level across the top and make it just as level as you can get it. When I level this head, it raises the one end up. That makes a space on the floor. And since this is a finished floor, you want that to be flush. So you take a scriber and set it to this distance and transfer it to the other side. That needs to be cut off, so you need to take the jamb out and put it on the bench. So when you put it back in place, both sides will be down on the floor and the head will be level. Now I'll mark the center of the door. This is 15 inches because it's a 30-inch opening. And now to be sure I get the same thing on the spreader, I'll put the spreader in place and then mark it. Square that across. I'll use this for the plumb bob. I use a 4 penny finish nail just to the side of the mark. Then when the string goes on, it covers the center line of the mark. You want to be accurate, and that does it. Just wrap the string around itself and hold it in place. You need to shift this over until it comes right in. That looks good. Snug up the other side. Be sure and always check it to make sure it lines up with the drywall. And then nail it up. I use 2 8-penny finish nails at each shim location, and again set them about 1/16 of an inch deep. Use 5 sets of shingles on each side, 1 the top and bottom, 1 right in the middle, and then a set between those. Later on I'll come back and be sure there are shingles behind the hinges and also between the latch plate on the other side. The other side is bowed in. I'll hold a straight edge with my knee. That'll free both hands, and then I'll shim it and bring it right to line. Be sure to cut this off just below the surface so it'll be out of the way of the trim. If you can't cut it with a sharp utility knife, saw it off with a handsaw.
Well, that's how I go about setting an interior jamb. And I use a plumb bob because it's fast and accurate. But you could also use a straight edge like this one. This has parallel sides, and I have a little block, one on the top and one on the bottom. Just put this against the jamb side like that, and you can use any size level to check it with. When it's plumb, just flip it around. Use the straight edge for shimming. Now, since this is just one door, I'll work on the door next, but if I had a whole house full of doors, I'd do everything in sequence. Set every jamb and every door opening, come back and fit each door, come back again and hinge. Now I'll put the stops on, and I'll be ready to cut this door. I'll set my square to the thickness of the door, and this is 1 3/8. Then I'll scribe a line down the jamb. Now on the hinge side, I'll gain a 1/16. The top piece of the stop is a square cut, and it's just pressure fit. And this is the side piece, and this is a cope joint. I like cope joints better than miters because it makes a nice tight joint. And one way to be sure that it's tight, put a little wedge on the bottom. I'll just tack this up for now, and when the door is in place, I might have to adjust it. All right, that takes care of the jamb. Now I cut this for a 30-inch door. Cut the head 30 inches because it's a 30-inch door. And I've saved myself a lot of trouble by making the jamb side straight. This will be the hinge side, and I'll mark it so I won't lose it. And then I'll need to cut these margins for the nickel and dime, and I'll bevel it at the same time. But before I do that, I'll put my router template on here and route out for the hinges.
Well, I made this template for doors that only need 2 hinges, top and bottom, but you can make one for 3 hinges, or heavy doors even sometimes use 4. First you cut the perimeter of the hinge and then clean out the middle.
This is a homemade router template, and it's right tight here on the top, and I'll show you how to make one of those in just a few minutes.
The router bit leaves a round corner, and I'm using square cornered hinges. So first of all, I'll cut away the fuzz, and then cut across the grain and with the grain so that it doesn't split. And I just pare out the corners. Now that the hinges are located, I can back them up with more shims.
Well, this is a door bench, and it's made out of framing lumber, and it's really easy to make. It has a stop here across the top. That'll hold the door in place, and you can adjust it for the door thickness. These rails across the bottom are adjustable so you can use different sized doors. There's a compartment on each end, and it's lower than the top, so your tools will be out of the way. There's a plywood bottom, which makes the frame more rigid, and it's open on the end, so you can sweep out all the sawdust and debris. The middle compartment is for you. You just climb in there and grab the rails and walk away with it. The bench is only 22 inches wide, so it'll go through a narrow door. When you want to work on the top of the door, or cut it off, just pick it up and put it across the top. This is the top of the door, and there's my hinge mark so I wouldn't forget. And this template is reversible. Part that I have here on the top of the door was on the bottom of the jamb. And here's my nickel spacing. Well, this is how this hinge template works. This is called a template guide, and it's bigger than this half-inch bit. You make your cutout pattern, and that fits through there like that. You follow the outline, and the bit does the cutting.
Well, cutting this mortise is just the same as it is on a jamb, except here I have the advantage of gravity. Cut around the outside, then I clean out the center. Check it for flush. Square the corners again. This end is fragile, so be careful. And now mark the location of the screws. And then punch them with a nail set just off center towards the closed side. Oh, need to tighten that a little bit. You should always drill pilot holes for screws, especially in dense wood like this, so the screws won't split it out. When these screws are off center, you'll pull it nice and tight to the closed end.
Well, this is the template guide that I used earlier, but I'll show you how to make one for yourself. This is a piece of half-inch plywood with a cutout, and this cutout is the shape of the hinge, and I arrive at the size by taking the hinge, and I use this space, which is the same as from the outside of the bit to the outside of the guide. Now I only need to worry about this size at the moment. This can be wider, and I'll show you why in just a minute. First, I'll lay out the hinge on the door. I use 5 inches here because it holds the door better, but 5, 6, and 7 inches are also standard. You wouldn't want this, and this isn't neat either. You should have a closed mortise, and also that'll keep the hinge pin away from the trim on the edge of the door. I'll start by putting the template over the layout on the door and judging equal margins. Not like that, but right there. Put a nail in it to hold it there until you put the strip on. Same thing on the bottom. Well, this is a piece of 3/4 square pine, and I'll use it for a connecting strip. Put a couple of spots of glue on. Put it in place and hold it there with drywall screws. Same thing on the bottom. Well, this template is exactly the same as the one on the top. This is 5 inches from here to the hinge. The only difference is on the bottom hinge, it's 10 inches from the bottom of the door to the finished cut of the hinge. I'll tell you more about that in the booklet.
Well, this electric plane is about 25 years old, but it still works really well. Has an adjustable fence. I'll check the square and then set the bevel by eye. It's about 5 degrees. make a series of cuts. The first one will be narrow and they'll get progressively wider as I go down. I like to use old hand planes, but electric planes are for speed. You can see the bevel on the machine, and now you can see it on the edge of the door. It's ready to hang now. I'll try it and see how it fits. Mate these hinges, put the top pin in, the bottom pin, and close it and check the margins. Well, that's pretty tight, but it looks like this hinge is sagging. There's some movements on that pin, so I'll take that out by throwing the hinge. Just a little piece of cardboard shim that came from the box that the hinges were packed in. If I take this leaf loose and put the cardboard in this position, it'll move the barrel that way, and if I were to put it over on this edge, it would move it this way. I'm going to put it behind here to close this margin up. That takes care of it. There's a dime, and there's the nickel. The lock set's next, and there's that 34 to 36 inches off the floor. I'll make this one 36 inches. But just in case you have a pre-finished door, or one that you don't want to make marks on before it's stained, don't mark directly on the door. Put a piece of masking tape on it. Now I'll put the 36-inch mark up here and square that around the door. Across the face, the edge, and the other side. Now I'll mark the back set, and this lock is 2 3/8, so I'll set my combination square, make this mark, and then mark the other side. But I'll have to put 2 marks on this side. This is 2 3/8, but the door is beveled, and that's about a 1/16, so I'll have to move that over. About that much. Then I'll mark the center of the door. Now this door is 1 3/8, so half of that would be 11/16. Make the mark and check it from the other side. Now I'll use my nail set to mark the centers. Now I'll show you what this 2 3/8 back set means. This is the latch, and when that goes in place, this will be flush across here, and the spindle that operates it will go right through there, and that's the center line. Well, the standard size hole for a cylinder lock is 2 1/8 inches. This has a pilot bit that I've started on the center punch. Drill partly through one side and then come in from the other. And now the latch hole. This is 7/8 of an inch, but some will require 15/16 or 1 inch. Now I'll put the latch in place. Make sure that it's lined up on the sides with the door, parallel. Use a hard lead pencil and mark the outside edge. When I take it out, I'll chisel this line and then route it with my electric router. Use a wide chisel now with a bevel in, but be very careful about this line. Too much pressure and you could really split that right out. This is just a score.
extend the line. Now just widen this a little. Well, here's the latch. I'm going to route this freehand, so here's how I set the depth. That's it.
I don't try to make a finish cut with the router. The big advantage is to establish the depth. I stay away from the lines and then clean them out later with a chisel. I've marked for and drilled the pilot holes, and now I'll try the latch.
All right, now I'll close the door and mark the latch. Now I'll set the depth of the latch with my square and then transfer that to the jamb. First you mark the depth, then transfer the lines over for the top and the bottom of the latch. Put the latch plate up in place, line it up for the cutout, and then mark around the outside edge.
There has to be a hole in the jamb for the latch to go, and that's called a keeper. It's bigger than the latch itself, so I'll just center it by eye. I've modified this spade bit with a chainsaw file, and it sure cuts nice.
I want the strike plate to be flush with the surface of the jamb, so first I'll mark the outsides of the plate. Notice that the bevel is in. And I'll make a series of chips and pare it out. I'll just guess at the depth. And when I pare it, I can take it down. Just like a Volkswagen. Before I leave the door, there's a couple other things I'll show you. Sometimes you have to cut the bottom off. A ½ inch would be the normal clearance on the bottom of the door, but it really doesn't matter. Just so it'll close the obstructions. Several ways you can go about it. You could scribe it, or suppose you had an additional floor thickness. It could be tile or an area rug or a marble threshold. Just put the material up and then mark it. Suppose the door has been taken down for new carpet and it needs to be cut off. Just take the measurement from here down to the new surface and then measure from the same point on the door. Now I'll show you how to cut the bottom of the door off. The bottom of the door is marked, and I'll cut it using this cutoff guide. A veneer door like this often chips when the saw blade comes up like this. So I'll put the cutoff guide right there on the marks and clamp it in place. And now, score this with my utility knife.
I don't need to score the underside of the door because the teeth are coming up. I use regular steel blades because I file them myself, but you could use a crosscut blade or a special veneer blade. Now I'll chamfer the edges because if you don't, you could lift the veneer and chip it. You can see that my plane is held at an angle, trying to avoid a chip.
Well, there are other kinds of doors other than this one that's been hung in place. This is called a split jamb. As you see, the jamb separates. And so first you put this part in, plumb it, nail it up, shim it, and then rejoin it. Now one of the advantages is the joint is concealed by the stop, and also You can use it on several kinds of wall thicknesses. That's a good unit. And finally, here's the disaster door. This is a 28-inch door that's supposed to go into this opening. It's only 27 3/4 at the top and 27 1/2 on the bottom. Well, it looks like the head's about 1/4 of an inch out of level. Check the sides. Well, that's plumb, but it's not straight. There's a good 1/16 of an inch crack through here. Check the other side for straight. And there's a bulge in the middle. Well, these are conditions you often run into in old work, and the door will have to be fitted to the jamb. All right, this door should be pretty snug. Push it up tight to the top and put a shim under the bottom to hold it. Now, I cut the door by measure, and it just fits in the opening. And now I'm going to try to do all the scribing at the same time so I don't have to take it down each time and do one operation and then put it up and take it down again. You see the head's not level. So instead of using my scriber, I'm going to use these wood strips. I often use these instead of shim shingles because they're parallel all the way through. And I've chosen these because one is a 1/16 and one is an 1/8. And I'll use the 1/16 on the hinge side and the 1/8 on the latch side. I'll just double them up and scribe down the line. Okay, the latch side gets an 1/8. And the hinge side gets a 1/16. Next is the hinge location. I'll just use 7 inches here. And when you mark the location for the hinge, you want to mark it both on the jamb and the door at the same time. So use any kind of a straight edge. And it's a good idea to mark the hinge location because a lot of them have been put on the wrong side of the line. Down here on the bottom, I'll use 10 inches. I'm going to make a second mark on here because this is going to be the space left on the top of the door. And when I put the hinges on and put this back in place, you'll see these two lines registered. And the same thing on the top hinge.
Now all I need to do is plane down to the scribed line. I'll make short strokes with the hand plane first to cut away the waste, then some long strokes to smooth the edge. I don't use the electric plane because this is a crooked scribed line and the long bed of the electric plane wants to cut straight.
And that's it for this side. Now the hinge side is up, and so I'll mortise for the hinges so I don't have to turn it around again. It's getting pretty close. And that's about it. All right, now I'll flip it over and plane the other side and put the bevel on at the same time.
Now that the sides are done, I'll cut the top. and using a finely tuned handsaw can be easier than a plane.
Now it should go up without any problems, but I'll see in just a minute. Hinges are mated. Pin's a little hard to get in. Do the bottom one. That's better. Now I'll close it and check the margins. Well, it looks pretty good. Here are the strips that I used to scribe it with. There's that one. And there's that one. It works. Well, that's the last door I have for you. And even though these doors and windows haven't been complicated, the procedure is the same for any door or window. I've been doing it for a long time. When you do yours, just take it easy and work accurately and you'll get it. Good luck.